Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for the California Victim Compensation Board's Trauma Informed Workshop. I am Robert Benchek, your host for today's event. Today's program includes two guest speakers who will present information on how the Cal VCB and the Office of Emergency Services provide compensation to victims of crime. Our goal today is to broaden your knowledge on how victim services are funded and delivered, as well as the many resources that are available to those who've been victimized. After each speaker concludes today, we'll open the floor to your questions. For those of you who are joining us online, I wanted to remind you that you can submit your questions through Cal VCB's Twitter handle and also the Facebook link. Both of those links are available on the Cal VCB public page. Please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Cal VCB Deputy Executive Officer for Victims Compensation, Christy Munson.
Morning. How's that? Can everybody hear me? I have to put my organized here. Well, first of all, I want to thank Lee ahead of time for coming in and co-presenting with me. And I'm going to mark the time. It's about 10:10. I don't want to take too much time. But I want to talk a little bit about, you can go on to the first slide if you want. Oh, I can do that too. Does this have a pointer, by the way? Is that this little red dot here? Great. Let me try it out. Oh, yeah, can you see that? Okay, good. I might need that later. My cat really likes the little red dot. Okay, today, why are we going to talk about this? Why this topic? What are we talking about and why? We're going to go, I know this is me and I'm like this, but we're going to delve into some history. You can tell I have a little bit of history, right? And then some of the information is going to be familiar to some of you who are out here in the audience or at your desks listening or in the counties listening today. But some of it might be new, and it's really intended as a primer. So I'm going to apologize ahead of time if some of it's a bit basic to you or some of you've heard some of it before. But it's valuable to have context. It's good to see what's behind the curtain. How did things happen? You can provide better services when you know more about a victim or a survivor's experience. When you know about their world, what help's out there for them, and what help isn't out there for them, when you have a realistic idea of what that's about. And it's good for you to get to know our world. Who pays our salary? Where does that money come from? Where does the money come from that we give to victims? And where does the money come from that funds victim services in California, in the state, and in the nation? So that's what we're going to talk about today, and we're going to give you some tools actually to learn more on your own if you want to. Let me tell you a little bit about me for those of you who are new to the board or maybe don't know me. I try and meet each of you, but I don't know if I've actually met everybody here in this room yet. I am Christy Munson, and I'm the Deputy Executive Officer for the Victim Compensation Division. I've actually been in the world of victim services since 1978, and that's a long time ago. Some of you probably weren't even around then. I started out as a volunteer in a rape crisis center when I was in college, and that was my first introduction to really the world of what happens to crime victims. And it was pretty early on in the time that in the world of victim services too. So things were pretty basic back then. In 1986, I actually became the victim witness coordinator in a prosecutor's office. So for about 8 years, I was a victim advocate in a prosecutor's office, and I learned a lot about the criminal justice system there and what happens to victims, what they have to put up with, how restitution works, how the court system works or doesn't work, as the case may be. And then in 1993, I became the director of a rape crisis center. So I learned from that aspect what it's like to be a VOCA subgrantee and a VAWA subgrantee and have to figure out where to get your money and how to spend it, but also a lot about the world of a sexual assault survivor and what happens and how when we're delivering services to them. I've been here at the board since 2001 for about 16 years, and I've worked in a lot of different places in the board too. I've worked, I think I started helping the executive officer, and then I worked in public affairs. I was a manager in, well, we didn't really call it BD then, it was Central Region. I was the manager of the county liaison and support section. So I've done several things in different places in the board too, and really enjoyed the time I spent here. Like many people who started as victim advocates, I never dreamed that I would come to work in victim compensation. And I thought everybody was a faceless bureaucrat in victim compensation, but I now know otherwise. And I know that we are all victim advocates and doing the best we can for everybody who's a crime victim. You can go on to the next slide. Oh, I can too. If I mess it up, but anyway. Okay, here we're going to start with early days. And I just want to give you a little bit of history about the crime victim movement. And I'm going to concentrate on ways that California was the leader of the pack as we go forward. And I'll weave in sort of a little bit more of the general history. We all know what happened in 1965, right? Victim compensation was born in California. We actually started as a small program that was a needs-based program, and it was within the welfare system, AFDC, at that time for the first 2 years. And it was, I think the allocation was about $100,000. But then after a few years, the legislature saw the wisdom of the program and thought it should be for everybody, not just for people who didn't have money. And that was really the way the world was going then with victim services. They started sort of like with people who really couldn't afford to pay for the funeral, but then they broadened into, well, this is the criminal justice system and it's not fair that people should have to be in this position, and everybody should have access to crime victim compensation. So in 1967 or so, the program was transferred to the Board of Control, and we operated it sort of in conjunction with the AG's office for a while. The AG's office did the investigations and the board did the payments. Then it's transitioned eventually all over to the board many, many, many years ago. Beyond that, and I think New York came next, and by the mid-70s, there was probably 25 or 30 victim compensation programs around the country. Victim services really didn't get their start formally until about 1972. And one of the first services for crime victims, and one of the first 3 in the whole country, was the Bay Area Women Against Rape in Alameda County, California, or maybe San Francisco. I'm not sure. I think they're in Alameda though. And in Alameda County, around the same time, they initiated the very first prosecutor-based victim services in the Alameda County DA's office for the state of California. So those are a couple of firsts there. The other thing that was born in California was the Victim Impact Statement. And that originated in 1976 in Fresno. Does anybody know what a Victim Impact Statement is? Just give me a raise of the hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, a few people do. Let me tell you, before 1976, victims had even after, victims had very little rights in the course of a trial or a prosecution or in the criminal justice system. And they sometimes weren't even allowed in the courtroom to hear what happened about the most important thing that maybe affected their life. For instance, if they were a survivor of a homicide victim, and they had to testify, they could only be in the courtroom when they were testifying, and they couldn't, most times they couldn't even be in the courtroom the rest of the time. Sometimes they wouldn't even be allowed at the sentencing hearing. And And that struck James Rowland as something that was wrong. And he was the chief probation officer in Fresno County at the time. And he started by deciding, well, when a person is recommended for sentencing, a probation officer does what's called a pre-sentence investigation. They have to find out all about them. They have to find out how much money they have, what their circumstances are, and now they are supposed to put in restitution in the pre-sentence investigation and all those things. And he thought, well, I'm going to ask the victim what they think. And so he put a piece of the pre-sentence investigation. He started interviewing the victims and saying what they thought. And that led to something that's used all over the country now, which is a victim impact statement. And that's a written or oral statement that a victim makes at the sentencing of an offender. And it started in California in 1976. And now the Victim Assistance Center in Fresno is named after James Rowland. It's called the James Rowland Victim Assistance Center because of that. And he was an early pioneer in victim services, along with a lot of other people from California that I'm about to tell you about. In 1980, California gave the first state funding in the nation for victim services. In 1980, Mothers Against Drunk Driving was born, and that was founded by Candy Lightner. But one of the first 2 chapters in the United States of America was in Sacramento, California. But things really got rolling in 1982. In 1982, Ronald Reagan was president, and he started a couple of things. And at the same time, I think Lois Haight Harrington was a prosecutor in Alameda County, and her husband got a job with the Department of Justice, and so she moved to Washington, D.C., and she got a job in the Department of Justice as the director of the Office of Justice Programs. And Ronald Reagan tasked her with chairing the President's Task Force on Victims of Crime. And here I have the actual report from 1982 that they wrote. And it was that report that led President Reagan to to propose the Victims of Crime Act. And it was Lois's persuasive writing, and basically they went and interviewed victims all over the country and wrote about their experience. It's a really interesting read. You can find it on the OVC website. And it's a little bit, in a way, it's heartening to read how many things have changed since 1982, and parts of it are disheartening to read because some of it hasn't changed since 1982. But it is a good read, and I'd recommend it. So in 1982, they spent a couple years, they made a report, and then the VOCA was enacted in 1984 with the first funding coming in 1986. But I want to read a quote to you from President Reagan. And just to precede, for those of you who weren't there in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, there was a lot more crime then. I mean, really, literally, we think there's a lot of crime now, and there is a lot of crime, but the crime rate has fallen steadily from the 1960s to now. And crime was, for us, of course, it's ever present because we work with it and we think about it a lot, and we're very aware of it. But it was very much a daily reality, especially for people who lived in urban areas in that time. And so I'm going to read you a quote from Ronald Reagan. He said, "Nothing has more threatened our sense of national well-being than the explosion of violent crime. One does not have to be attacked to be a victim. The woman who must run to her car after shopping at night is a victim, as is the tired cleaning woman who can't ride a subway home without being afraid. We do not seek to violate the rights of defendants, but shouldn't we feel more compassion for the victims of crime than for those who commit crime?" And I want to read to you something that James Rowland also wrote when he invented the victim impact statement. I should have read it when I was talking about that, but I skipped it. Here's what he said. I wanted to spread the word that crime does more than cause a victim to fill out an insurance form. For some victims, it is a matter of inconvenience. For other victims, it's a life-changing experience. Based on my observation and experience in the 1950s, when he was a police officer and a probation officer, I simply felt the need to share that information. I wanted people to know that there was a lot of pain and a lot of people were hurt. And that's sort of where we came from in the early days. Fresno, Alameda County, Fresno County, kind of hotbeds there. And the other thing that happened in Fresno County in the early late 1970s, I think, was they invented the first academic training for victim advocates. And they now have a major in victimology there and in many other places. But Fresno was really the base of the beginning of people's ability to actually get professional training as victim advocates. Okay, enough history. Let's go on to kind of a map of where we are now. So, and that would be the next slide. Oh, let me see if I can do it. Done. Okay. I always have to turn around and check though. I don't know, these presenters who can just go on and click without looking. I can't do that. Okay. On the national stage, funding for victim services flows in a couple of different directions. Most of it goes through the Federal Department of Justice. Some funding, not all for victim services, but mostly for prevention and a few other, and some things like that, flows to the Centers for Disease Control. And I'll talk in a little bit more detail about that when we talk about VAWA. But really, the funding that goes through the Federal Department of Justice is about the criminal justice issues and criminal justice system. But it funds all kinds of victim services and not necessarily only victim services that flows to people who are in the criminal justice system, but it funds domestic violence shelters, rape crisis centers, youth advocacy programs, all kinds of things. And Lee will be talking more about that. The funding that goes to CDC is because the government also views violence as a public health issue. And it is a public health issue. And so they are putting money into CDC for prevention and to study the violence as from the lens of public health. There's a lot of victim services on the federal level. U.S. attorneys' offices all have victim advocates, just like prosecutors' offices do here in California. The FBI has victim advocates in every office that they have. The Department of State has victim advocates that help people overseas. They do lots of help for American citizens who have their passports stolen, who are assaulted overseas, who need help overseas. The consulates in all the cities that you travel if you go to Europe, they all are there to help American citizens who become crime victims. That's one of the things that they do. And then we also have, through the Department of Justice, a program that's a compensation program for victims who are international victims of terrorism. So American citizens who are victims of terrorism overseas can apply to the International Terrorism Victim Expense Reimbursement Program, or ITVRB. And the armed forces are another place where the federal government has put a lot of effort into victim services, both general victim services and specifically for sexual assault victims. Every branch of the armed services has a victim advocate in every base, and also a sexual assault response coordinator in every base. If you want to look at a website that's really good, you can go to the Army. If Brian can click on that link on the bottom, and you can see an example. It takes him a minute. But the Army, the Navy, the Air Force all have pretty comprehensive services for victims of crime. And in the Army, is it working? In the Army, or in the armed forces, victims of sexual assault can make either a confidential report, or they can make a report, they can make a public report. So they can make a report where they ask to have nothing done, or they can make a report where something is done, and the sexual assault response coordinator helps them with that. This is an example of the Army website. It didn't quite all load yet. There we go. You can see it's pretty good, and I would recommend looking around at the different websites that the federal government has for victim services. Okay, you can go back now to the next slide. Now I'm going to talk about the Department of Justice. Okay, the Department of Justice is really big, and this is a tiny little piece you're going to see on this next slide. It is, I suppose they have, I don't know, maybe 100 divisions and many, many duties at the Federal Department of Justice. It's like the AG's office here. They do everything. But it is also, they are the top law enforcement prosecutorial agency of the United States government. And I'm going to talk about two specific pieces. Now, this is where I'm going to use my little pointer. I don't know if you can see, but here's the US DOJ. And then here's the Office of Justice Programs and the Office of Violence Against Women. Again, these are one of hundreds of offices in the DOJ. We'll talk a little bit more about the Office of Violence Against Women when we talk about VAWA, but I'm going to stick right now with OJP. And there's OJP itself has, I think, a dozen divisions and it's the Office of Justice Programs. So there's many, many things that they do too, and they're very interesting. So I'd recommend going and taking a look at their org chart. But the two I want to talk about besides the Office for Victims of Crime, which I'll spend more time on, are the Bureau of Justice Statistics. Those are the folks that gather all the information from law enforcement officers all over the county, and they tell us how much crime happens when and where. Through several different instruments that they use to the National Criminal Justice Survey and a couple of other things, the FBI statistics that all law enforcement agencies have to send in to give us an idea of what crime looks like in America. And then, oh, shoot, I did that, didn't I? How do I make it unstop?
You did that square.
Oh, thank you, sorry. And then the other one is the National Institute of Justice. That's right, there is my pointer right there. Thank you, Brian. The National Institute of Justice is the research arm of the Office of Justice Programs, and they research everything. I get emails from them every day with a new paper that's come out. You can sign up for the emails and take a look at the papers that they write on victims of crime. There's like 5 or 6 of them a day that come out, and some of them I forward on because to like Jeff or somebody because they're sort of interesting. A lot of them aren't anything that we're interested in. But there are tons of research going on there. But what I really want to talk with you about is the Office for Victims of Crime. Oh, shoot, I did it again. Sorry. God. Here we go, OVC. I'll just put that down. So the Office for Victims of Crime has several things that they do. One of them is they give us all of our money. I'm going to talk about that in more detail when we talk about VOCA. But the middle one is the Training and Technical Assistance Center on there. And that's where we all benefit from that. We use their training. We've had you take their training, and there's a lot more training I'm going to show you in the next slide that you can take a look at and take advantage of. And the other is ITVRP. That's their compensation program for terrorism victims. Within VOCA, they give out formula grants, discretionary grants, and they also give out a grant, and this is one that we've taken advantage of twice because of mass violence events in California. The AEAP grant, which is the Anti-Terrorism Emergency Assistance Program. And we recently worked with San Bernardino County to get a grant from them of several $1 million to help the victims of the December 2nd, 2015 terrorism attack in San Bernardino County. And we also got money from them in 2002 to assist the California victim survivors of 9/11. One of the things I want to talk about is the discretionary grants. And because I'm going to talk more about the formula grants later, but OVC gives away money to do research, to do, and we have gotten discretionary grants. That's how we did our needs assessment and our baseline data report and our gap analysis a few years ago to see what we might need to do better and what other services victims need in California that we might be able to provide. And they also do, they're kind of like a think tank for victims of crime. In about 2000, they did this, which is a follow-up to what happened in 1982, and it's called New Directions from the Field, Victims' Rights and Services for the 21st Century, and it sort of expands on everything that got done between 1982 and 2000. Then, recently, in 2012, I think, they did Vision 21, and that really, that they don't have a book because, of course, it's online. Hey, but that really is part of our roadmap for how, as a nation, we're going to go forward with victim services. And I would encourage you to look that up and take a look at it. It's pretty interesting. If you want to. Okay, let's go ahead to the next slide. This does have some links, but I think we can go from, once we get to OVC, we can just go right from there. We don't have to come back to the slide. So if you want to just click on the first one, we'll go to the OVC website. And you can get all this by Googling. That's how I always get it. I don't remember these things. I'm going to take you to the OVC website, and I would encourage you to become familiar with it and really take a look at the information that they have on there. The first place I want to go is to the homepage, but I'll wait till we get there. Then we're going to go to training and technical assistance and look at their victim assistance training online. OVC, it began actually before VOCA in 1983. And they really set the tone for what happens or doesn't happen for victim services in the United States. And that, for instance, they set the theme for National Victims' Rights Week every year, and we do that, and we follow their theme, and they give us their posters, and they don't tell states what to do, but they do have some broad parameters when we get to VOCA and VAWA that we have to follow about how we use the money. Here we go. So this is the general OVC website. And then I'm going to go to, I'll use the pointer. If you just click there, if it's live, if you can go to the next slide, here, TTAC, and then click on Learn More right there. Thank you, Brian. This is the Training and Technical Assistance site. You can learn, if you have a curiosity about other things and you want to learn more about crime victims, this is where you go. And I would encourage you to go right here, which is, oh wait, here we go, right here. And if you want to click there, this is the Victim Assistance Training Online. And if you want to click right there, that'll take us to the course catalog. Anybody can sign up for these webinars. And I'll read you, it's kind of blurry, so I'll read you some of the, what they are. Civil justice system, criminal justice system, oh, thank you. And you can just scroll down, military justice, tribal justice, types of victim services. And then you've got core competencies and skills, active listening, advocacy, all kinds of things down here. Anyone of you can sign up and do these classes. If you want to do that, I encourage you to talk with your supervisor about doing it and making it part of your IDP. They're online webinars, usually 30 to 45 minutes to an hour. So if you are at all interested in signing up for some of these, do talk to your supervisor, and it's certainly appropriate activity for you to do for your IDP, because they're really pretty good e-learning. They're not, the production value is not the greatest, but it's really not bad, so, and I find them pretty interesting. And then the next thing you want to go to, if you can do back button to the first screen. Yeah, please. And then if you can go, let me see, I can't really read it. Help for crime victims, it's the fourth black bar. And go to getting help overview. And then go to online directory of local programs. And then start here. Okay, this is an online directory of pretty much every program in the country, funded by OVC. I mean, if they fund a program, they've got it in this directory. So if you're, say, in customer service and you have some questions about what might be available for somebody in a certain area, you can go to our website. But if you're talking to somebody who needs help in Maryland or Georgia or some other state, this is where you would direct them to one of the places you can direct them. And you can find out more here too. I won't go into, you can figure out how to do it when you go in. And then the other, when you go on there yourself. But if you can go back to the homepage. And then, yeah, I think scroll to the mass violence. You might have to go to the search. Go up in the site search and do mass violence toolkit. They have a lot of toolkits. And, oh, it's the first link. Okay, this is a kind of what it looks like. I would also encourage you to take a look at this. And I know, as you know, we have our own mass violence response plan, and we're going to be issuing an invitation to staff at headquarters to help us on the mass violence response mass violence field response team. So if you're at all interested in that, you might want to take a look at the toolkit and learn a little bit more about it. And as well, those of you out in the counties who are listening, it's a really helpful tool. And I know that county victim advocates are in the process of getting training from Cal OES through a Cal OES grant on the mass violence response and building a mass violence response in every county. So it's something that everybody in the state is actively working on right now to make sure that we are prepared when mass violence occurs. And those of you who work in program know that we deal with incidents of mass violence on a regular basis. So, okay, let's skip to the next slide. We're talking about VOCA. Got a few more here and they're almost done. I want to talk about how VOCA works. VOCA funding funds a large portion of victim services in the whole country. The VOCA was passed, it stands for Victims of Crime Act, was passed in 1984. Funding became available in 1986. And it funds both compensation and victim assistance programs. And you'll hear more about how that works in California in a minute. But I want to tell you a little bit about the distribution of the funding. The VOCA fund has grown over the years to be quite sizable, and it's funded just the way we've fund our program in California, and that's from fines that are paid by people who are convicted in federal criminal court. And I don't know how much, there's way in the double-digit billions in the fund right now, like 90 billion or something like that, isn't it? I don't know how much it is, but there's a lot of money in it. I don't know exactly how much. But for a long time, there was a cap on how much money was allowed out to victim services because they were never sure. You don't know how much money you're going to get each year or how fast it'll be spent. And the cap was set sometimes high, sometimes low, but lately in the 2000s, it has been set pretty artificially low, and victim services didn't have a lot of money from that. But that's changing, and I'll talk about how. They set a cap on how much can be distributed each year out to victim services and victim comp. Under that cap, then they take away some money for the Department of Justice and a bunch of other programs. Whatever's left gets split. 47.5% of it goes to victim compensation. 47.5% of it goes to victim assistance programs. That would be like rape crisis centers, domestic violence shelters, survivor of homicide programs, and things like that. Of the money that is allotted for the victim compensation programs, the way that's distributed is for every state dollar that we pay out every year, we get 60 cents on the dollar back from that fund. So as you all know, we paid out about 53 million almost dollars last year. Those weren't all state dollars. Some of it was federal dollars. So of the state dollars we paid out, which could be 25, 30, it depends on what year it is. We get 60% of that back from the federal government. And we have 3 years to spend that. So that's a really important part of our funding stream. But all of the state programs together, that 60%, it used to be 40%, they raised it to 60 about 10 years ago. That doesn't add up to 47.5% of the VOCA money that's set aside for comp programs. It just doesn't mathematically add up. So whatever's left over flows over to the victim assistance side, and they get all of that money to spend every year and used for 3 years. So in some states, every state does everything a little bit differently, just like every county in California, in case you hadn't noticed. But in some states, victim assistance and victim compensation are together in the same department. Sometimes a standalone department. Often in many states, it's in the Attorney General's office, and so they work, in the same department with each other. In the other states, they're separate. Like in California, the victim assistance funds flow to the California Office of Emergency Services, and that's where Lee's from, and she's going to tell you about that in a minute. And then in like Illinois, the victim compensation money goes to the courts, and the victim assistance money goes to another agency. And it's different in every state, but in about 30 some states, they are combined. And the rest of them, they're separate. So there's different ways that states divide up and use the money, but usually the comp program is very a standalone piece of whatever it is. Let's see. Okay, so let's talk about allocation. I'm just going to tell you how that's gone in the last few years. And I'll specifically, I don't know if you're going to talk, are you going to talk about the allocation? Yeah. Okay, well, she's going to talk about it, but I'll just briefly say that for the way that it's changed in the last few years, and she'll talk a lot about that. It started, for instance, in 2013, the allocation for victim assistance in California was 48 million. In 2017, it was 218 million. So there's been a lot of change over the last few years, and that's what Lee's going to talk about. If you want to move to, does anybody have questions about VOCA? How we get our money from VOCA? Let's talk about VAWA, another acronym. Next slide. Do you mind? Thank you. That stands for Violence Against Women Act. And that was first enacted in 1994, and it's been renewed several times since. And the VAWA money flows through the Office of Violence Against Women in OJP. And it's really targeted to investigation and prosecution of violent crimes against women. They have several formula grants. The STOP grant is services, training officers and prosecutors. And so that goes to victim services, it goes to prosecutors, it goes to law enforcement. Sexual assault services program. And they also fund state coalitions, sexual assault and domestic violence, and tribal coalitions. And then they have discretionary grants too. But the other place where VAWA funding goes is to the Center for Disease Control, where they put money into prevention. They have rape prevention education and domestic violence prevention there at CDC. And I'm sure Lee will touch on that because in California, the California Office of Emergency Services is the recipient of both the VOCA and VAWA grants from OJP. Okay, next slide. All right, there's a lot. That's just how the federal government works. I just want to tell you, there's a lot of other organizations in nationwide that help victims of crime. And I'm going to explain a few of them to you, but just very briefly. This one is ours, the National Association of Crime Victim Compensation Boards. That's the 50 state compensation programs getting together, talking about things. Julie, our executive officer, is a member of the board. And the organization's run by a gentleman named Dan Eddy, who helps all the compensation programs communicate with each other and helps us with issues when we're wanting to talk to the federal government as a group about whatever we need to talk about. There's a similar organization for VOCA assistance programs, the National Association of VOCA Assistance Administrators. MAD is a national organization. Parents of Murdered Children, started in 1978, has chapters all over the nation, including California. The National Organization of Victim Assistance was born in 1975, and it's just a coalition of victim advocates way back then, but it's hung around for a long time. There's also the National Center for Victims of Crime, which was started by the family of a woman named Sunny Von Bulow, who was killed in the early 1980s by her husband. The National Sexual Violence Resource Center, the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the National Network to End Domestic Violence, the National Domestic Violence Hotline. This is an important resource for us all to know about because the hotline if you're talking to someone from another state or who needs to know about resources in another state, it's a great place for them to call. And the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network is another national hotline that will help people get to resources in other states. In all of these places you can look up online. One of the newest organizations is one born right here again in California, Alliance for Hope. And that is basically the national network for family justice centers. And for those of you who are new, might not know what a family justice center is, but that's a one-stop shop basically for domestic violence and sexual assault victims and some other victims of crime, where they can get counseling, they can talk to an investigator, they can file a compensation claim, and basically do everything they need to do without having to visit a dozen different offices. And there's a great family justice center in Alameda County, Riverside County, San Diego County was the first one, and that's where the Alliance for Hope is based. Casey Gwen, who at one point was the city prosecutor for San Diego County, is the spearhead behind this organization and the movement. And there's one that's recently opened in Sacramento. There's probably 15, 20 of them in California by now. And that is it. Okay. Oh, I wanted to talk a little bit, actually, before we moved on to California, about how victim services are provided in other countries, because it's not always the same as it is here. And I thought you might be interested to know just a little bit more about what happens in countries outside the US. For instance, in Great Britain, they have a completely different scheme for victim compensation, and the amount of money that you get depends on what happens to you. So there's a set formula. So if you're sexually assaulted, you get a certain amount of money. If a family member is killed, they calculate the amount of money you get, probably based on who that family member is and what what the financial impact would have been. If your arm is broken, if you lose an eye, if you become paraplegic, all have a different set amount of money that you get. So it's not like we do with reimbursement. It's completely different. In Germany and France, they have a completely different system. In Germany, they have a three-party criminal justice system. And so the government provides an attorney for every crime victim. And they have a place at the table in the course of the prosecution, in a very different way than our criminal justice system operates. So it's not all the same all over, but the European Union itself does have a requirement for new members, because they're getting new members now, to have a victim compensation program and have victim assistance available for crime victims. And we've helped a couple of countries in the recent past. We had a delegation from China who came to see our program and see how it worked a few years ago. And just a few months ago, we had a delegation from Kosovo who came to find out more about our program. And we gave them some presentations and spent the afternoon talking with them about victim compensation. And they spent a week in San Francisco touring the victim services there so that they could learn more about how that worked, because they're applying to become a member of the European Union, and they're setting up a victim compensation and victim assistance program. So it's just a little bit interesting to see how it works in other places. In California, and I swear I'm almost done, sorry. We have a number of organizations kind of analogous to the national organizations, the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence and the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault. I won't worry about clicking on the links. You can find those for yourself. It's not hard. I would encourage you to take a look at them. They both have robust websites, and it's a great place to find out where rape crisis centers and domestic violence shelters are. And the other statewide coalition is the CCVAA, and many of you will know who they are. That's the California Crime Victim Assistance Association, and that's the Association of Victim Witness Centers. And we often host meetings of the Compensation Committee of the CCVAA here in our building. And the membership is made up of the directors of all of the 58 Victim Witness Centers that we work with on a daily basis. There's other organizations in California too, though. They include, and there's a lot more than this. I'm just giving you the high-level overview to show you that we do have different victim service organizations. One of them is the Victims of Crime Resource Center at McGeorge Law School. And I don't know if you're familiar with their website, it's 1-800-victims.org, and they have a pretty robust mobile app that you might want to download because it directs you to victim services all over the state of California. And that's they have been there. They're at McGeorge, the McGeorge School of Law, and one of the things that they actually specialize in is helping victims with issues regarding restitution. And we work closely with them when they're helping people who need compensation help. One of the newest organizations, just about 5 years old, is Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, and they're an outgrowth of Californians for Safety and Justice, the organization behind Prop 47 and Prop 57, if you know a little bit about those that were recently passed. And then one of the older organizations is Crime Victims United, and they sponsor that march that we've traditionally gone on every year in the spring during Victims' Rights Week, and they were founded by it's a grassroots group founded by Harriet Salerno, whose brother was murdered. And then we also have ICANN, which is the Crime Victims Assistance Network, and we work regularly with them. They're based in Sacramento. They do statewide work, but they also help crime victims in Sacramento. And MAD and Parents of Murdered Children, we also work with because they have chapters and state organizations here in California. One of the things I want to talk about that's happened in the last 10 years that's really important in California is Marsy's Law. And that was a constitutional amendment to give crime victims a number of rights. Oh, 5 minutes. Okay, thank you. I only have 2 more pages. Look it up, okay? That's your homework. I want to talk about restitution now. And this hits a little bit closer to home about where we are and what we do. And some of you might know more about this than others because we do a lot of work regarding restitution. But if you're new or if you're not in AFD, the Accounting and Finance Division, maybe you don't know. Restitution happens at the time of sentencing, and it's what the judge tells the defendant he has to pay to the victim in order to make that victim whole because of the crime. And so it may be slashed tires, it may be a medical bill, it may be a lost income, it could be anything. It could be property damage, it could be repair my car, replace my car, whatever. Whatever the rest, that's what restitution is, and it's supposed to be imposed at the time of sentencing. And the person who's supposed to get the information to the judge is the prosecutor, often with the help of the probation officer. The actual restitution order is called a CR 110, and you may see that in Notes and Cares, or you may hear about it. We also can be listed as a victim on the CR 110. So if we've paid out on a claim, then the prosecutor or the probation officer who's preparing the pre-sentence report needs to know what we paid out in order to get that ordered as restitution, so that we can collect that from the defendant. And part of the way we're funded is through restitution orders, through those restitution orders. The other thing I wanted to mention that's really important related to that is the CDCR form, the 1707, because CDCR has the ability to collect 50% of any inmate's account and put it toward their restitution fines and orders. And so, but the only way a crime victim can get that money from the CDCR is if they fill out this 1707 form and let CDCR know who they are and where they are, and that they need their restitution. So that's an important thing for you to know when you're helping them, if you're ever talking about the issue of restitution. The issues that we have regarding restitution are imposition, making sure that it's imposed when it's supposed to be. If we're not finished paying, we may not know how much we're going to pay out because the sentencing happens too quickly. And then we get what's called a to be determined order. Sometimes we just get to be determined orders because nobody's gone to the trouble of figuring out what needs to be on the order. And those are a problem for us because we will never get any money back from that. So we need to go back and figure out where those are and what they are, and rectify that afterwards. And we actually have staff that work in prosecutors' offices in 24 counties through what we call the criminal restitution compacts, whose job it is to make sure that restitution is imposed on behalf of the board, so that then later we can collect it. Who collects restitution is getting more problematic. I don't know if you're really familiar with realignment that happened a few years ago in the criminal justice system, but basically many felonies were changed to misdemeanors, and so prisoners were redirected to county jail and probation and other types of supervision instead of prison, to basically relieve prison overcrowding is one reason that it was done, but for other reasons too. And that realignment has changed the way restitution is collected, because county jails collect restitution differently than prisons might, and they don't all have the same uniform way of collecting restitution. And that's had an effect on how money comes to us. And so we're constantly trying to figure out how to stay current with all of the different ways the money is collected. But okay, I'll talk more about that. Let's go on to the next slide. This is the last slide, and then I'll stop. Let's talk about the restitution fund itself. That's what funds the compensation program, okay? It's made up of fines and orders, money from the penalty assessment. Fines make up by far the largest portion of the restitution fund. And one of the reasons that they do is, well, there's more of it than the actual restitution orders to CalVCB. Everybody who's charged with a crime, whether it's from a traffic ticket to a murder, pays restitution fines. It's different depending on the level of the crime. But it can be up to, for a felony, it can be 100 to, maybe it's 200 now, to $10,000 or something like that. But on every crime that's committed in California that somebody is convicted of, if there's a $100, $200 fine, restitution fine, that comes into the restitution fund. Counties are charged with collecting it, and they didn't collect very much of it until about the mid-1990s, when we had the brilliant idea of putting forward a statute, or somebody did, that said, if you give us money within 45 days, if you send it to the victim comp program within 45 days of the time you collect it, you get 10% back. So you can keep collecting it to fund your collection efforts. And once we did that in the 1990s, our collection of restitution fines went from 3 million to 30 million in a not very long period of time. So that's a big chunk of where we get money for the restitution fund. And it's very important how that system of collection works and how that money gets to us, so that our administration and finance division works on making sure that keeps that stays smoothly flowing. We actually are empowered to collect some types of court-ordered debt ourselves. If someone has been discharged from probation and not fulfilled all the fines that they are supposed to pay, or if they've been discharged from prison and parole supervision and they haven't paid all the fines they're supposed to pay, then we can collect it ourselves. And we have programs within our administration and finance division that do that. And that's really important too. And then the other part of the restitution fund are those orders that come to us. And that's a much smaller part compared to the other, but it's still very important, because every dollar helps. Every dollar that we can get back to give to another crime victim helps. And then we also get some money through the penalty assessment fund. And that penalty assessment fund is, well, okay, there's a restitution fine on every crime, and then there's a penalty assessment that's the same amount of the restitution fine. And don't ask me how that makes sense, because I didn't figure it out. But you have to pay both. So when you have a traffic ticket, you're also paying a penalty assessment that also a little bitty bit of that comes into our coffers too, and it goes into some other coffers. Some of it goes to OES and goes to other places too. One of the impacts of realignment is that it sort of jiggled our collection system a little bit, because fewer people, the collection system in CDCR and in the prison system was pretty smooth, and we got that money, and we still do, but now there's fewer people in prison. And that collection system for people who don't go to prison is not as smoothly functioning thing as the CDCR collection system. So we have to work continually to make that work better. And does anybody have any questions? That is it. Yeah, Candy.
If a victim broke an eye socket as a result of a crime and goes and gets a restitution directly, and then they also receive compensation benefits from us, we pay those medical bills. Did we go after the victim? Or are they?
That's a great question. Candy's asking, for those of you who couldn't hear her, if somebody receives restitution for something that we also paid a reimbursement for, what happens? And that's one of the reasons we have those CRC compacts, and we try and get restitution to the board imposed at the beginning on the sentencing level, is to avoid just that problem, because that way it's really clear to the sentencing judge. This is what the victim had to pay out of pocket. This is what the victim compensation program paid. If there is that conflict, then one of the things that's on our application that people sign and say is that if I get restitution for one of these expenses, yes, I will pay you back. And that's a really important message as we're telling people about compensation for them to have, that, hey, make sure that you're not getting restitution for something that we paid for too, because that's going to cause a problem, and it could cause a problem eventually. So we do go back after that. Any other questions? Do we have any questions online? Okay, I'll turn it over to Lee. And if you have more questions, you know where to find me.
Thank you, Christy Munson, for that very informative presentation. We are all grateful that you could give us your time today and make our program successful. I want to introduce our next guest speaker, Lee Bills. Ms. Bills is the Chief of Victim Services Division at the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, Cal-OES. The Victim Services Division oversees state and federal funding for various victim services programs across California. These include domestic violence shelters, rape crisis centers, and many programs for marginalized victims. Ms. Bills started with Cal-OES in 2001, and she has served in positions such as Criminal Justice Specialist, Federal Funds Administrator, and the Domestic Violence Unit Chief. Prior to joining the state service, Ms. Bills spent 6 years working as a victim advocate in both shelter-based organizations and local government. Ms. Bills holds a Bachelor of Arts in Social Work from Eastern Michigan University and a Master of Social Work from the University of Michigan. Please join me in welcoming Lee Bills.
Thank you. I wanted to start by telling you a little bit about myself, which has been done, but my path to victim services is very much like Christy's, very much like many, many victim advocates. In undergrad, I was looking for a practicum and I decided to volunteer at a domestic violence shelter. And originally I thought I would do the children's program because that seemed the easiest, that I probably could do that without being too afraid. But as I went through the very long training, most of you probably are aware that a lot of our programs have 40-hour trainings, and it's the same in Michigan. I decided to give the hotline a try. And I'll never forget my first night on the hotline because it was terrifying. We had done a lot of role playing and we were, they said you're ready, but I didn't feel ready. And it's the middle of the night and I just felt nauseated because I was so afraid of what the person on the line was going to call and what their problem was going to be. And I don't actually remember the call, but I do remember how hard it was to do that work, how scary it was at first. And then as you do the work, how challenging it is for you personally, how time consuming it is, but yet rewarding work. So I say that because I come from a perspective that what we do at Cal-OES is to try to create programs that are really for victims. And we also have to keep in mind that we have to support the people that are doing that work. So what I'm going to tell you about today is a little bit about our organizational structure, a little bit about our funding, not a lot because it's boring, and a little bit about how we administer the funds, and then go over some of our programs. So the first thing you need to know about Cal-OES is that we change our name a lot. We started these programs back in the 80s when the funding came through, was administered through the Office of Criminal Justice Planning. And that's where I started. And it seemed like a natural fit. I actually came to the state because I couldn't afford to pay my student loans. I loved being an advocate, but it didn't pay well enough. And anyone who's worked in the field knows that that's challenging. So I made this switch and I too felt like, wow, I'm going to be a bureaucrat. But I haven't regretted it because we still get to do work that benefits so many people. Next, we changed our name to the Governor's Offices of Emergency Services. The agencies were merged. Then we merged with Homeland Security and changed our name to CalEMA. Then we changed back to the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. So if you're ever hearing people talk about the agency, sometimes you'll hear people use the names interchangeably. And we make the joke that we just need to get one of those church signs so we can take the letters out and put our new name out because it's crazy. I have so many business cards, it's ridiculous. So that is just a little bit of background. The next thing is people always ask why we are at OES. And it doesn't seem like a natural fit at first because OES is known for responding to natural disasters, preparedness, mitigation, response, recovery. And what we do is a little bit different. However, it is similar in that these are personal emergencies and we are helping communities prepare and respond to crime. And in some instances, mass criminal events, but mostly just individual crimes. Our organization, we're huge. And there we are, right there. That is the Office of Grants Management. And under there is the Victim Services and Public Safety Branch, which is where I am. And none of this matters except to say that we're this huge bureaucracy and we're this one little piece. And in some ways that is a struggle, but in a lot of ways it's really a great thing because the accounting function in our agency is a well-oiled machine and money is moving. And there were times in the past when the money didn't move as fast as we probably wanted it to. So that is really a wonderful thing. One of the things I want to say is if anyone has questions, please just raise your hand and I'd be glad to repeat the question for anybody who's not in the room. But I really, sometimes this information is not the most exciting information. So if you have a question or something to add, please do so. And this is what we do. We administer approximately $300 million annually. Our grants are different lengths in time. So we obviously have money that stays over for a period of time. We have 86 programs, and I'm going to go over each and every one of them with you. Just kidding. I'm not going to do that. That would be awful. And we have 910 grant awards. So we have some of those subrecipients have multiple awards, but we have 910 grants or contracts that we put into award every year. We also have 60 staff. And the next slide is the units within our agency. And this is the most important person, that's me. And I think I'm the most important person. And these are just the units. We have federal funds managers, we have support staff, but that's the basic structure. And we have the 7 units that do the programs. And we try to keep our programs in a unit that makes sense, but it's not always possible because we do need to worry about work distribution, workload. So most of the time the programs will make sense, but every now and then we'll see one that just really doesn't fit. And it'll be in the human trafficking program, but it's increased access to services. So that kind of thing happens, but we do try to use our units. This is the next thing was the money. Talk a little bit about our money. And this is what we had for years and years and years. And this is what we had after the crime victim cap was raised. So we really went from not having enough money to fund victim services in California, having to decide which program to fund, meaning lots of really quality programs didn't get money, to having this windfall and so much money that we can really fund all kinds of wonderful things. These are our federal funds. And like Christy said, we do administer the STOP Violence Against Women Act grant, the SASP money, the Family Violence Prevention and Services money, and the VOCA money. So the VOCA money, when the cap was raised, our allocation quadrupled. So we went from 51 million to 260 million to now 218 million. And that's a wonderful thing, but it came fast and we didn't have a lot of time to figure out what to do with it. So we're really struggling and working hard to make sure every dollar gets out to California and that none comes back. I'm so happy to say that we have allocated every dollar of our 2015 award, and lots of states haven't done that. Now what we're dealing with is the folks that couldn't spend it. We're bringing it back to Cal OES, we're finding other causes and pushing it back out. So each of these funds, what makes our job challenging is each of these funds come with different rules, different regulation, different purpose areas, different time frames, different reporting systems. And so we try to make them all work together. We're very fortunate because we do a lot of them, and that makes coordinating these efforts easier. Some states have SASP in one office and VOCA in another office, like Christy was saying. Sometimes they're spread across the state, and that makes it harder on the field because they may be getting funding from 6 different agencies to do similar work. So what we're able to do is fund many of our programs with multiple sources of funding. So we can give them some STOP money, some services, training, officers, prosecutors, violence against women money. And with that money, you can do law enforcement work. So they could do training for law enforcement. And then we can give them some VOCA money, which would allow them to do direct victim assistance. So we can combine our monies. We can give them some family violence prevention, which allows them to do a little bit of prevention efforts. So we can support agencies to do a variety of work by giving them multiple funds. These are our state funds. And like Christy said, some of it is state general fund and some is penalty assessment. None is restitution funds at this point. It has all been switched over. And those are the state funds that we receive and the programs they go to. One of them is the Victims Legal Resource Center, which Christy spoke about, which is McGeorge School of Law. And they do a lot of great work for all victims. And then the thing that I get asked most about is the VOCA Victim Assistance Program, because it is our huge program. And we are so excited because in the last 2 years, we have been able to create 20 new programs things that we've wanted to do for years, and I'll tell you about some of those programs, but never had the funds to do. We were able to fund about 500 new grants. So if you look at our total number, we've doubled in size. And we've been able to increase support for existing subrecipients and expand 5 of our big programs that we knew more folks out in California were doing this work, but we didn't have the funds to support them. So we did a competitive process and we're able to expand those. The other thing I get asked a lot is how we make decisions. And all of Cal OES's funding is at the discretion of our director. However, we have quite a few advisory boards. And this is what we used to do with our advisory boards. We took them and said, who are we going to cut? Where are we going to take money away? And this is us now. We're just looking to give people money. So any idea you have, feel free to come to the VOCA meeting and let us know, because we're looking for good ideas. And the advisory bodies we have, I have them here and you have them in your handout. These 3 are in statute, so we are required to work with them, and they have different language. Sometimes it says collaborate closely, sometimes it says administer in collaboration with, or sometimes it is more directed like CJA, they actually make state decisions. So those kinds of task force guide us in making decisions about those particular areas. The Domestic Violence Advisory Council helps us with one of our programs. So this is a state committee that really works on just advising on our big shelter-based program. Then the next one are the broader committees that we have. And those are committees that we developed to guide us with our 2 big fund sources. And they are open meetings if anybody's ever interested in coming. It's thrilling and riveting. So our programs, our goal is to reach as many victims as possible. We want to have multiple entry points for victims. We don't want to have, all of these systems are great. We don't want to just have family justice centers, and we don't want to have just grassroots organizations. We want to have a lot of entry points. As you know, we have 52% of victims who don't even want to report their crimes, and that's something that comes from the Department of Justice. So we have a whole lot of people that are never going to enter a police station or a court office, and we still want to provide them services. And we're delighted that that is also a priority of OVC. So we have to have a lot of different places where people can go. And in California, we are a wonderful, diverse state, but we need to have a lot of wonderful, diverse programs. So that's one of our main goals. We also want to make sure that we're treating victims through their whole lifespan. Recently, we were able to bring back our elder abuse programs, and that's important because there's a whole set of special needs for people who are elderly and are victimized. These are our programs, and I'm not going to go over all of them, and they are all not represented in the next few things I'm going to do, and which is talk about different groupings. And I could group these a lot of different ways. I could group them by training. I could group them in law enforcement. I can group them by victim topic. There's just a lot of ways, and a lot of them can go in multiple groups, but I've grouped them just for discussion in the way you'll see in a minute. Before I do that, I want to say that our programs should be working in collaboration with what all of you do. All of our programs should be helping victims access your system. And when I was an advocate back in the late 90s, we were still typing the forms. So when a victim wanted a comp claim, I sat down at my typewriter, not a skill I would say I have, and tried to get all the letters in the right boxes. And I really applaud how victim compensation has evolved and the progress that's been made, because I know it is way easier now to apply and get compensation than it was in the 90s. It's a wonderful thing, and it benefits so many victims. Recently, I went to the VOCA State Administrators meeting, and I kind of thought you would talk about this, but you didn't. The new director, Darlene Hutchinson-Beal, I believe is her name, she spoke, and she told her personal story about how she was abducted at gunpoint in college. And she went on, and I don't remember the details other than she said that the comp program really saved her life. She applied for and received benefits, and that is what allowed her to continue college, to continue on her path, and now she's a strong victim advocate. So I was excited to see that the new OVC director, all of the OVC directors have been wonderful, but that she comes from a background that appreciates the work you do, the work we do, and understands the importance of it. I'm hoping she will understand the importance of match waivers because that's something that's important to us. So, okay. So, programs that serve all victims. I think everybody is familiar with the Victim Witness Assistance Program. That is the program that really serves anyone who comes through their door. We also have a county victim service program. So one of the things we did with our money is we gave money to the counties and said, you tell us what you need in your county. I'm a firm believer that communities know what they need. And I like this idea, this concept. It's been a bit of a struggle because, as you know, counties and the systems in counties don't always agree on what they need. So it's been a challenge, but it is really our effort. It's a $40 million effort to let counties decide where that money could go. It could go to APS to serve victims. It could go to Victim Witness. It could go to a shelter. It can go to all kinds of different things. So that has been an interesting program, a little bit challenging again, because it's so diverse, but really I think a strong effort. The other two on this page, or other three I wanted to talk about, were the legal assistance, the transitional housing, and the emergency shelter program. These are new for us, and we're so excited because when the cap was raised, they also changed the rules for this money. They broadened what you could use it for. So a lot of the restrictions were removed. We can now use it to provide criminal and legal assistance for victims, which is huge. Something we didn't have any funds to do before. But for example, if there is a young woman who's trafficked for the sex trade and she is picked up and she is convicted of prostitution, we can fund an attorney to go help her get that crime expunged from her records so that she can go on and recover from that crime. We can help, we've always been able to help the DV victim with the personal protection order, but now we can go and help them with divorce proceedings, with child custody issues, with any issues they're having with their landlord over not paying their rent. All of those things are just really wonderful programs, wonderful assistance that we couldn't do that we can now do. So it's very exciting. Transitional housing, we did a little bit of that before this big windfall of money, but not to the extent. Now we have transitional housing, not just for DV survivors, but for transitioning age youth that are victims, for elderly that are victims, for human trafficking survivors that are needing longer assistance. So that's a new area for us that we're excited about. And then the emergency shelter. So our domestic violence shelter program is governed by statute and by that advisory body I spoke of a few minutes ago. And it comes with 14 mandatory services, which were written in the 70s. So they're a little outdated. And the emergency shelter program is VOCA funded, so they can do all kinds of things. So what we're looking for is new ways to provide shelter or shelter for specific populations. We all know that the Native American community does not necessarily want to enter into traditional services. So that's one area. Someone could, this is a solicitation that just recently closed, so I don't know what we're going to be doing with it, but someone could propose to do a shelter just for Native American victims. And it doesn't have to be domestic violence. It can be any victims who need emergency shelter. I'm hoping some folks from APS will apply for money for elderly. So the APS system can help with housing, but there's that immediate need. If I am taken to APS or come in contact with APS, APS can't come up with dollars tonight to put me somewhere safe. This program could, and it can pay for a caregiver to stay with the elderly person. So an elderly person, if they're a domestic violence victim, likely isn't going to be comfortable going to our regular brick and mortar shelter. That's not going to be work for them. But this program could use money to keep them in their home and bring a caregiver in, or take them to a hotel that has handicapped accessible bathrooms or whatever they need. So that's a very exciting program for us, and I'm interested to see what we have. The Victim Legal Assistance Program, and why I say it can serve all victims, but they can also propose to serve particular types of victims. And these are some of the groups that people applied for and were successful. So we have programs that are focusing on the elderly, on domestic violence, sexual assault, on immigration. So in the Central Valley, we have a program that's focusing only on assisting with legal issues around immigration for victims. The youth, that's a huge area that we're emerging into. And then of course, human trafficking. Anybody have any questions? The next area of groupings is sexual assault, and we talked a little bit earlier about rape crisis centers, and we do fund those, and they are an invaluable core service for us. They are the folks that will go out in the middle of the night meet a victim at an emergency room when they're about to have a forensic medical exam. They will show up with sweatpants and clean underwear and shoes or whatever. They're not shoes, they don't take shoes, but they do take other clothing through the evidence collection, and victims don't have those things, and these programs do that work. They also work with a lot of campus survivors. They work with a lot of folks in detention facilities. They just do amazing work, and I'm always impressed with how much they do with how little we give them. Some of the more specific programs is our effort in detention facilities. That's a new one. We are getting ready to fund 10 agencies. We're giving them money to fund a specific person to go and do that work. And then they can get the appropriate training, safety training. You're going into a prison. A lot of folks don't want to do that. And the reality is that they're relatively safe, but that's easy for me to say because I'm not going, right? So they're doing a lot of training around that and working in there. The Campus Sexual Assault Program is a program that's new. It's about 2 or 3 years old at this point, but it's modeled exactly after the Office of Violence Against Women's program. And that's an exciting area for us because one of our efforts or one of our goals is to make sure that institution-based victim advocacy and nonprofit community-based advocacy are working together. And as you know, they have different functions, right? So someone who is a victim witness advocate is helping someone through the criminal justice system. I did that job and it is so rewarding because you get to really explain the system and you are suited to give them that information about the criminal justice system. However, after they complete that system, they're not likely to stay connected with the advocate at the DA's office. The Rape Crisis Center can take them through the lifespan of victimization. And the issues don't end when someone is through the criminal justice process, so they have a different role. But they can't provide the kind of court advocacy that a systems-based advocate can. Same thing with the campus program. The campus advocates can help with adjudication. They can help with housing advocacy to say, okay, you were victimized in this dorm, you don't want to live there anymore. Let's see if we can get you into another dorm right away so you're in a safer location. Whereas the community-based advocate can have support groups that they can go to when they graduate. We know a lot of the victims and campuses drop out of school, unfortunately. That community-based program can collect them and still provide them services. So they both have roles, and we have a lot of turf wars in the programs we have, but we spend a lot of time talking about there's more than enough victims to go around, nobody's competing for stats, and that it's so important that the systems work together for the benefit of the victim. The other one is our advancing prison rape elimination, and that goes hand in hand with the detention facility advocacy. And that is doing work to make sure that inmates who are sexually assaulted in a correctional institution or who were previously assaulted have access to a confidential advocate. And that's a challenging thing when you're in a prison because there's not a lot of confidentiality and your phone is over here on the hook. So they are working on how do we do that? How do we say, okay, they can say that the advocates can say that they're an attorney so that the prisoner can comfortably go and not know that everyone's looking at them to see who they're going to meet. So they're working all those issues out, which is huge. They're working on issues that if someone is going to get a forensic exam, that they can have an advocate there and that we can try to avoid having people shackled to beds while they're having a forensic exam and such. So those are really exciting areas that we are emerging into. The next is our domestic violence programs. Our big program is the shelter-based program. We have 102 shelters across California, and they do all kinds of great work as well. They too will go pick someone up in the middle of the night and bring them to shelter. They food, clothe, and house people, and that's an expensive endeavor. It's not necessarily the most innovative way to serve, and there's lots of different ways to serve domestic violence victims, but that's the kind of old standard that we're still doing, brick and mortar shelter, and there is a place for that. But there's also a place for new innovative services, and that's where we get to our Domestic Violence Housing First program. And it's modeled after a Washington-based program where it is very trauma-informed. It's based on the empowerment model where you say to the victim, what do you need? Do you want to stay in your home? Then we're going to help you with money to stay in your home. Do you want to go to a transitional housing? We're going to help you do that. So it's a little bit more flexible, and it's exciting because we couldn't do this with VOCA money before, but now we can. And we can do something similar to what you're doing. We can pay for relocation if the victim needs it immediately and it's not reasonable that they could get it through the COMP program in time. So we don't do a ton of that, and I know you guys all work on that end, but we can do that. So if somebody needs to get out of the state tonight and wants to fly to their mother in Iowa, you can pay for a plane ticket for them to do that. If that's what's going to make them safe, we can now pay for that, which is exciting, very exciting. We can also pay for rental assistance, which we weren't able to do. And the VOCA administrators, we spend a lot of time talking about, can we pay security deposit? Because what happens when it comes back? Does it go to the victim? Does it go to us? How do we get that back? And those are issues we're still grappling with. But at this point, the states are mostly saying, we're going to say that it just becomes a donation to the victim because we don't know how we can get it back. So that's exciting. Another thing we can do is car repairs, huge for victims. If they are a victim of domestic violence and their car is broken and what they need to be safe is to be able to get their car fixed, to take their kids to school, to go stay somewhere else, or whatever they think is best for them, we can pay for that. So those are really exciting new areas for us. And you all have been doing a lot of that work, being able to reimburse people for years. But for us, this is really a new opportunity. And we're focusing on a lot on that 52% that don't want to be in the system, those folks who don't want to come through the traditional system. And we have a lot of those folks here in California. The other one is the state coalition, and that is what Christy talked about, the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence. We fund all of the coalitions, and the reason we do that is A, they're wonderful, they're strong advocates. They go and they're part of the reason we got the VOCA cap raised, is because they go do the national advocacy. We don't pay for that because we're not allowed to, but we pay them to do training and technical assistance for our subrecipients, because nobody trusts the government and nobody trusts their funder. So they don't want to come to us and say, we have no idea how to do nonprofit management. They don't want to tell us that. But they can go to the partnership and they will provide technical assistance to help them, and they don't report it out to us. So I think that's a really important thing, because the people who go into this work are not usually finance folks. They're people with big hearts who want to help people. And lots of times the accounting aspect of these agencies is where they struggle. So they can help a lot with that and not have to tell the big bad funder that, you know, we're supplanting and we don't know what we're doing over here with our money and our general ledger. The next one is our Native American programs, and this is an area that we struggle. We really struggle to have tribes, tribal consortiums apply for our programs, but we do have a few, not as many as we'd like. We have the Child Abuse Treatment Program, and the good thing about this program is we have a regular child abuse treatment program that does clinical work, which we don't do a lot of clinical work. Our advocates do. They bear witness, they help with resources, they can be supportive, but they are not clinicians, they are not clinical therapists. A lot of the work you guys do with funding the clinical therapists some of these agencies have both. So they have therapists that you probably fund, reimburse for, and then they have other therapists that we may support to do the same work for folks who don't want to get in the system. The Native American Child Abuse Treatment Program, last year when we went competitive, we opened it up to say, you tell us what you want to do. What does your community need for healing children? Because in the past we said you have to have a licensed therapist and they have to go through this background check and they have to have this and this and this, which is not what the tribal communities were telling us they wanted. So we opened it up and said, you can do whatever you want. If you think equine therapy is going to benefit child abuse victims, do equine therapy. If you have other ideas of what you want to do that. So that's exciting for us, because I think it takes a while, but we really want to allow communities to do what is best for them. The next one I grouped is our criminal justice programs. And Christy talked a little bit about that. That is mostly funded with our Violence Against Women Act, our STOP fund. And it is definitely to improve the criminal justice response to violence against women. And all of our programs have a strong victim piece. So whether they're a training program or a direct response, one of the requirements is that they provide victim services above and beyond what they do for their normal caseloads. Then the child and youth, this is just a small spattering of what we do. We have so many. When I looked at the list and cut and paste, it was, 25 programs. Some of the new exciting things is child advocacy centers. So those are the folks that will do the forensic exams for children who have been sexually assaulted or physically abused, and then provide the services for them. We hadn't done that in the past. We're just getting ready to release a program to do that. So we're excited about that. Bullying in schools. This was a push from our VOCA steering committee. So this is a regional program where The folks we fund will work with school districts to provide resources to children and parents of who've been bullied. So if the children have been bullied, it's a place where they can go, but it's also a place where parents can go to help learn how to help their children. And all of our children's programs are focused on families, because you can't help a child without helping the family that they live in. Okay, the next one is our human trafficking programs. We had, right when we got our VOCA money, we also got $10 million to start a human trafficking program, which was exciting, but also the timing was a challenge. So we have, I think 22, is that what it says? 22 comprehensive human trafficking programs that do an assessment, they do housing, they do legal assistance, they do clinical work, they do all kinds of things, and that it's a really great, exciting program, but it is state funded, and this year we only got $5 million for it. So we're struggling to see how we will continue that program. However, like I said, the guy throwing the money, we got a lot of money, so we will probably be able to support that without any problem. We also have along with the money, when the VOCA money increased, they gave the states a one-time training grant. So they understood that we're putting all these new advocates in the field, we're going to need money to train them. So California got $2.7 million to do training. And one of the things we did was a huge 2-year project around human trafficking. So we're funding the community service program in San Diego to do, in Orange County, to do a huge human trafficking program across the state for victim advocates, first responders, and anyone else who's interested in coming to that. So we have a lot of training programs that are new and exciting that are coming, but they're all being developed because we got the money in 2015, and really most of them are in the curriculum development phase now. Oh, great. That's wonderful to hear. You know, and we're working on getting all of our training, because we have so many all of a sudden, on our website with links, and people are welcome to go to those. I haven't been to any of them yet, but I anticipate that they're going to be really, really good trainings, and really, hopefully really interesting trainings for anyone who comes in contact with victims. Prevention is next. We have just a tiny bit of money for prevention. And like Christy said, most of the money in the state, which is not a lot in terms of victims, goes to the California Department of Public Health. And we partner with them on our efforts because they're the experts. We don't do prevention. We're just, again, emerging into this area. So we work with the Department of Public Health. We actually give them a grant to give us technical assistance, to review our programs, to make sure what we're putting out is best practice, and we couldn't have done it without them. I mean, trying to teach me prevention was not an easy thing. We got, you know, we have, primary, secondary, tertiary. It's very confusing. So we've been really grateful to them, but we're excited that we have our teen dating violence prevention program, which is a holistic program, part in schools, part in communities. So we're looking at social norms change, education, but not just school-based, an entire community. And then we have our family violence prevention program, which is in statute, so it's a little bit more narrow in what they can do. The last area that I wanted to talk about is the other marginalized victim programs. So I already talked about some of them. If you looked at the slide, you'd see that there was an LGBTQ DV program, and there's other Native Americans marginalized communities, but then there's some other marginalized communities that we're trying to reach out to. The first program is our Unserved, Underserved, and that's an ongoing program. But again, we broadened what you are allowed to do with it. So because we have to have stats, and because people want outcome measures from us and we don't have it, we just have output, meaning we know how many people we served and how many counseling sessions we did. We don't know whether that person is safer or happy or more well-adjusted after the crime. We don't have that kind of outcome data. We have a transient population. It would be very hard for us to do. So what we wanted to, so we had, the point of that is that we have a tendency to really give these narrow programs, but that's not what communities need. They need flexibility. So we're opening up our programs to say, you tell us what you're going to do with the bare minimum. You must fund one advocate, but beyond that, you can tell us what you're going to do for your particular community. So for the underserved, I'll come back to the slide. I just gave you the top of what we have. So we put out a competitive request for proposal and said, you tell us the communities you want to serve. And these were the ones that got the biggest response. So 8 of our recipients that were successful wanted to do elders. And you can see the rest right down the list. And then we had 47 total. So we had whatever this number is minus 47, those individuals, we had that many more special populations. So off the top of my head, one is likely immigrant women, and one might be farm worker women. And there's just endless numbers of specialized marginalized groups that people wanted to serve. 47, that's a lot of different marginalized groups, but these are the ones that had more than one applicant apply for it. Okay, going back, our newest one, and it closed just recently, is our innovative response to marginalized victims. And I really pushed because we were trying to get away from unserved, but when we released our unserved, we weren't really there yet with accepting the term marginalized. Now we are. So we have an innovative response to marginalized victim. And this is a little bit different, and it's similar to the underserved, but we can't have too many subrecipients doing all different things. So this one is aimed at boys and men of color, of youth, and there's a couple other populations that we were aiming to serve. But really what we're looking for is new ways to serve victims, not the traditional advocate sitting in an office, you come see that person. So you think about young men who are survivors of gang violence. They're not gonna wanna come see me in an office and talk about their feelings. That's not what they're looking for. So we're looking for new ways to engage, whether they're street programs where people are out looking to engage victims, or we're not really sure what we're gonna get, but we're hoping we're gonna get some really good new ideas. Okay, the last one on this page that I wanted to talk about is our increased access to services, because I love this program. We don't get a ton of response because it's not a lot of money, but this program is one-time funding for any of our agencies to do something to increase access to services. If it means putting we can't do capital improvement, but putting a ramp so wheelchairs can get up, that you can do that. If you want to make your bathroom ADA, you can do that. If you want to have your website change to be appropriate for folks with lower IQs, you can do that. If you want to have all of your materials translated into a bunch of languages, you could do that. So there's a lot of options for what people could do. And we hear that all the time. You know, we have language access plans. Are people familiar with that term? We don't have any money to implement ours. Well, now you do. You can apply for this and you can say, we're going to pay for translators for the next year and see if that makes a difference in your program. So folks are buying equipment with it, the two-way iPads, the phone systems, they're translating things into Braille, they're doing all kinds of really great work. So that's one of my favorites, but again, it's not getting the kind of response we had hoped for. Okay, the last thing I wanted to show you, and so we can get out of here before lunch, I know, is where we are on the website. If anybody is dying to learn more about these programs and they want to read the full description, this is where you would go, and it's hard for me to find, so I always put this on all of my slides. But this is us, and you have to go under Cal OES divisions. Then you would go under grants management, and then you would go to search for grants. But you see the big search for grants? For some reason, that's not us. And you know, that's FEMA, so that's not us, but it confuses people all the time. We're the little one on the side. We got a lot of money, but we're still the little one on the side. We're working on that, but we're a slow ship to turn. I will tell you, I've been working on trying to get a listserv for 2 years. So it's a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of reasons. Just like you guys were saying about the thumb drive, we have a lot of concerns about, you know, our systems. So that is where you would go. And then you would be able to search for anything you were interested in. So if you wanted to learn about that, you could go there, which I know you're all dying to do, right? Right after you go to all the federal sites, you're gonna go and read all our stuff. So that's all I have. If anyone has any questions, I'd be glad to take them. I did have on my slide our org chart and all our open positions to point to in case anyone was interested, but then I thought better of it. So that's it, that's all I have. Does anyone have any questions or? Sure.
I'm just curious, who's applying for some of these grants? Are they churches? Are they school districts? What
that's
type
a good
of
question.
communities, or how are they applying, and who is applying for these grants?
Right. So that's a great question. Most of the time we see the same folks over and over, which is what we're trying to branch out. Through the last one, we did take on 83 new subrecipients, folks who had never been funded for us. So that was a big step forward for us because we tend to see the same big nonprofits being successful in grant writing. We do have a couple churches who have applied and been successful and are implementing programs. And what was the other group you said? School. And then the only school-based programs we have are the prevention and possibly the bullying, but no, we don't have any school-based programs other than those. Mostly it's nonprofits that are already doing the work and are looking to expand, but we are really happy to pick up, and we're 83 new, and we're hoping to pick up a bunch more through the Innovative, because we want to expand the services and not just expand the agencies, but like I said before, we're really interested in getting multiple entry points for victims. Oh, over here, I think.
Concerning sexual assault, I was wondering, I know there's generally with many counties, there's a backlog of processing rape kits. Is that an issue your office can address?
So we do have a program. Oh, does our office work on processing, backlogging rape kits? And we don't really. We do have one program that's very small that does do DNA testing and backlogging, but it's a small effort, and that's not where we focus. Our money can't be used. Our victim money can't be used for that. That's one small grant we receive. And there's a lot of discussion on that out there in the community about whether we want those tested, because we're going back and testing kits, and then just at the federal meeting recently, knocking on people's door and saying, guess what, we've tested your kit. The victim may have moved on and not want to go there again. So that is an area that I think is really needs to be addressed and needs to be focused on, but we don't have money that we can use that for.
Hi, I was curious, does your website explain how to go through the process of asking for a grant? I mean, do you have to write something specific? Is it an application?
It's
I know
awful.
you said something that there was a group or something who you can say, hi, I don't know how to do this, and get help.
Yes. The answer to that is yes and no. Our website doesn't help much, and it's a very difficult process, which is probably why we see a lot of the same folks over and over, because they've mastered our system. But to get a federal grant, you have to have a lot of systems in place. You have to be comfortable with the CFR. You really have to be kind of up and coming, at least at the minimum. So we did recently do a webinar, which we are getting posted on our website. And we had, I think, 200-300 people on how to complete a proposal for us. So I'm not sure if that's up. It was just last month, and it was really well attended. But that's one of our efforts, is to get out and do more bidders conferences and more trainings on how to get through our system, because it's not easy. Any other questions? Everybody ready for lunch? Okay, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Lee Bills, Cal OES. And in the beginning, Lee mentioned how on that organization chart, she was this division in the small corner of that page. Folks, I got to tell you, I think there's a hidden underground bunker out there somewhere, because the number of programs and the functions that she described for us today are impressive, very impressive. I saw the parallels, and I'm sure you did too, about who we're trying to reach: underserved populations, marginalized victims. But, you know, the challenges are there, but I think we have the resources and the people. Lee, I have to thank you personally, but I think the rest of our board would like to tell you that we are glad that you and many professionals like you in Cal OES support us and are a partner in helping victims. So thank you again, Lee Bills. Okay, I have one request before you walk out the door, folks. In the audience here in the conference room, we have a written survey. We really need you to fill that thing out to tell us how we're doing, so we can make our program stronger, better, and serving you, and obviously increasing knowledge. For those of you online, I will remind you that Cal VCB has a Twitter handle, helping victims, but also please put your electronic comments through Facebook and the Twitter as well. Thank you so much for being with us today. We look forward to seeing you next time.